Snow has memory. It remembers every footstep that has ever pressed into its surface, every child who has ever caught it on their tongue, believing each flake unique as God's own fingerprints. Every tear that has frozen before it could fall and shattered into crystals that look like letters if you know how to read them. On December 19th, 1927, in a farmhouse 3 miles outside Brattleboro, Vermont, where the Connecticut River bends like an arthritic finger pointing towards something no one can quite see, snow began falling with purpose rather than chance, with intention rather than indifference. Each flake carried something, a word, a whisper, a fragment of a message that had been trying to deliver itself for 4 winters, but had only now found the right combination of cold and sorrow and desperate love to make itself known. Eleanor Hartley stood at her kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, watching the snow fall upward against all laws of physics and reason, and knew with the certainty that comes from living 43 years in a world that breaks its own rules when it needs to, that someone was trying to tell her something that couldn't be said any other way. The Hartley farm sat in a valley between hills that had no names, because naming them would have made them smaller, more manageable, less like the sleeping giants they resembled under their blankets of pine and shadow. The house itself was already old when Eleanor's grandfather had bought it in 1842, its bones made from trees that had been saplings when America was still a British argument. 2 stories of weathered clapboard, the color of old cream, windows that rattled their frames in any wind stronger than a sigh, rooms that held cold in their corners even in summer, as if saving it for harder times. Eleanor had lived her entire life in this house, except for the 3 years she had spent in Boston attending normal school, learning to teach children their letters and numbers. Though what she had really learned was that some distances can't be measured in miles, and some educations happen in the spaces between what is taught. She had married Robert Hartley in the parlor of this house on a June day in 1905, when the lilacs were so heavy with bloom they bent their branches to the ground like penitents. When she was 21 and believed that love was enough to fill any silence, heal any wound, survive any winter. Robert had been 12 years older, a quiet man who spoke to horses and cows more easily than to people whose hands knew every secret the earth kept about seeds and seasons, whose smile was rare enough that earning one felt like finding money in the road. They had been happy in the way that Vermont farmers are happy, cautiously, carefully, never taking more than their share of joy, as if it were a bank account that could be overdrawn. For 9 years they had tried for children, and for 9 years Eleanor's body had refused or been unable to hold on to the souls that tried to take root there. 7 miscarriages, each one leaving her a little more hollow, a little more transparent, as if she was slowly becoming glass and one day would simply shatter into pieces too small to reassemble. Robert never blamed her, never spoke of disappointment, but she saw it in the way he looked at other men's sons during harvest. The way his hands lingered on the heads of calves, as if practicing for a tenderness he would never get to properly express. Then, in 1914, when war was eating Europe, and Eleanor was 32 and had almost given up believing her womb would ever be anything but a grave, Daniel was born. He came into the world during a blizzard that lasted 3 days, as if winter itself had paused to witness this miracle. The midwife barely made it through the snow, and Robert had to tie a rope from the house to the barn so he wouldn't get lost in the white blindness just 50 feet from his own door. Daniel was small but fierce, his first cry cutting through the storm like an accusation or a celebration, maybe both. He had Robert's dark hair and Eleanor's green eyes, and something entirely his own, a quality of attention, even as an infant, as if he was listening to conversations the rest of them couldn't hear, as if he was taking notes on the world for a report he would file somewhere else. For 7 years, they were complete. Daniel grew like corn in good soil, steady and sure. He learned his letters before he was 4, sitting at the kitchen table while Eleanor made bread, shaping the alphabet out of flour and water and concentration. He followed Robert through the fields, his small legs working twice as hard to match his father's stride, learning the names of everything that grew and why and when. He had a gift for finding things. Lost tools, escaped chickens, the first violets of spring hidden under last year's leaves. "Daniel will find it," became the family refrain whenever something went missing, and he always did, as if the world wanted to please him, wanted to show him its secrets. The influenza came to Vermont in September of 1920, late enough that people had started to believe they might have been spared, that the plague which had eaten cities might not have an appetite for small mountain towns. It took Daniel on his 7th birthday, September 15th, the day already marked forever with both beginning and ending. The fever ate him from the inside out over the course of 6 days while Eleanor sat beside his bed, applying cold cloths that turned hot within seconds of touching his skin, while Robert stood in the doorway like a man watching his house burn with no water to fight it. The doctor came twice, said there was nothing to be done except pray, but Eleanor had forgotten how, the words turning to ash in her mouth before she could speak them. Daniel died just as the sun was setting, the light through his bedroom window turning everything gold, even death. His last words were, "Mama, the snow is coming early this year, it has something to tell you." Then he closed his eyes and stepped out of his body as easily as stepping out of muddy boots, leaving Eleanor and Robert holding on to something that looked like their son, but was really just the house he had lived in, empty now, for sale or rent to no one. They buried him in the family plot on the hill behind the house, under an apple tree that had been planted the year Eleanor was born. Robert carved the headstone himself from Vermont granite, working through the nights because sleep had become impossible, chiseling out letters that seemed too small to hold the enormity of what they meant. Daniel Robert Hartley, 1913-1920, Our Light. After the funeral, attended by everyone in 3 towns, because Daniel had been the kind of child people remembered who left fingerprints on hearts, Robert had kissed Eleanor on the forehead, put on his coat, and walked out into the first snowstorm of the season. They found his body in the spring when the snow melted at the base of Putney Mountain, frozen in a position of reaching, though toward what, no one could say. That had been 7 years ago. 7 winters of Eleanor alone in the house that had held so much life and now held only its echo. She had considered leaving, moving to Boston or Burlington or anywhere that didn't have Daniel's height marked on the doorframe, Robert's coffee cup still on its hook, the silence that sounded like held breath. But leaving felt like abandonment, like agreeing that they were gone, and she wasn't ready for that kind of surrender. So she stayed, teaching at the schoolhouse in town, coming home to rooms that remembered better days, sleeping in a bed too large for one person, keeping the graves clear of snow as if Robert and Daniel might need to find their way home. Now, watching the snow fall upward past her window, defying gravity with a casual disregard for physical law, Eleanor set down her cold coffee and really looked. The flakes weren't just rising, they were organizing, arranging themselves into patterns that almost made sense, that tickled the part of her brain that recognized words but couldn't quite read them, like trying to remember a dream after waking. She had seen strange things in her years on the farm, lights in the woods that didn't come from any lantern, corn that grew in perfect circles without being planted that way, clouds that spelled out warnings about weather that came true. Vermont was old in ways that had nothing to do with dates, and it kept its own counsel about what was possible and what was merely probable. She put on Robert's old coat, which still smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and hay, and stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit her like a physical presence, sharp enough to cut, but she barely noticed. The snow was definitely falling upward, rising from the ground in graceful spirals, and as it rose, it was forming letters, Not English letters, but something older, more fundamental, the kind of writing that existed before humans decided to trap meaning in symbols. Yet somehow she could almost read it, the way you can almost understand a song in a language you don't speak if the emotion is strong enough. The snow spiraled higher, and Eleanor followed it with her eyes until she was looking straight up at a sky that shouldn't have been visible through the storm, but was, clear and black and punctured with stars that seemed too close, as if the ceiling of the world had lowered to accommodate this message. And then she saw it. The snow was coming from Daniel's grave. Not from the sky down to the grave, but from the grave up to the sky, as if the earth was writing a letter to heaven, or heaven was drawing something out of the earth that had been waiting to be said. She ran, slipping on the ice that had formed on the porch steps, catching herself on the railing Robert had built the summer before Daniel was born, when they still believed in futures that included grandchildren. She ran through the garden gate that hung crooked on its hinges past the well that had gone dry the day of Robert's funeral and never refilled, up the hill to the family plot where 5 generations of Hartleys lay under stones that grew more illegible with each passing winter. Daniel's grave was glowing, not with light but with something else, something that made light seem like a poor translation of what was actually happening. The snow rose from the earth in ribbons, in sentences, in paragraphs of frozen breath that spoke without sound. Eleanor fell to her knees beside the small headstone, her hands pressing into snow that should have been cold, but felt warm, almost alive, almost like the soft skin of a child's cheek. "Daniel," she whispered, and the snow responded, swirling faster, rising higher, forming shapes that were almost faces, almost words, almost answers to questions she hadn't known she was asking. Then she heard it. Not with her ears, but with the part of her that had known Daniel was gone before the fever broke, that had known Robert wouldn't come back before he kissed her goodbye, that knew things wives and mothers know without learning them. It was Daniel's voice, but not as it had been at 7, older, as if he had continued growing wherever he was, as if death was just a different kind of childhood that had its own stages of development. "Mama," the voice that wasn't quite a voice said, carried on the uprising snow like words on wind. "I've been trying to write to you for so long, but the mail between worlds is slow, and you have to wait for the right weather, the right weight of sorrow and joy mixed together, the right kind of snow that remembers how to be words." Eleanor's tears froze before they could fall, becoming tiny prisms that caught the non-light from the grave and threw it back in colors that didn't have names. "Daniel, baby, where are you? Where's your father?" The snow swirled into something that might have been laughter. "We're here, Mama. We're always here. Death isn't a place you go to, it's a way of being in the same place differently. Like how water becomes ice, becomes steam, but it's always water. We're in the steam stage now, but we're still in the kitchen, still at the table, still on the farm. We just vibrate at a different frequency than you do. But sometimes, when the conditions are right, when the love is strong enough and the need is great enough, we can make the frequencies match for a little while. Like now." More snow rose, and in it, Eleanor could see shapes. Robert milking cows that weren't there but were Daniel reading books that had never been written but existed. The two of them walking through fields that were simultaneously harvested and fallow spring and autumn, all seasons at once. They were living a life parallel to hers, but shifted slightly to the left or the right, or up, or in a direction that didn't have a name because no one alive had needed to go there yet. "The letter," Eleanor said, understanding suddenly why she had been drawn outside. "You're writing me a letter." "I've been writing you letters for 7 years," Daniel's voice came through the snow. "Every snowflake has been a word, every storm a sentence, every winter a chapter, but you couldn't read them until tonight, until you were ready to understand that death is just a very long pause in a conversation, not the end of it, Papa helped me figure out how to make the snow fall upward. He says it's all about intention and irrigation, that you can water the sky the same way you water the earth if you know the right channels. Eleanor laughed, or sobbed, or both, the sound escaping her like birds from a cage. It sounded exactly like something Robert would say, practical magic dressed up as farming wisdom. What does the letter say? The snow began to form actual words now, English words, though written in Daniel's 7-year-old handwriting, all crooked letters and enthusiastic misspellings. Dear Mama, we are okay. Death is like being born backwards. First everything hurts and is scary and too bright. Then you remember how to see and breathe, but different breathing, like breathing light. Then you learn to walk again, but the walking is more like floating if floating was solid. Papa says to tell you the corn should be planted 2 weeks earlier next year because the summer will be hot. I am learning to read books that haven't been written yet. They are very good. There is a library here made of everyone's unfinished thoughts, and it is very big. I met your babies, the ones before me. They are nice. They said they weren't ready the first times, but they are practicing being ready. Maybe they will try again. Papa is building a house here, just like our house there, so you will feel at home when you come. But no rush, Mama. Time is different here. 7 years or 70 years feel the same when you know they all lead to the same door opening. We watch you every day. We are proud of how you keep going even when the going has no reason. That is very brave. The snow will keep bringing letters now that you know how to read them. Look for us in the uprising snow, in the steam from your coffee, in the smoke from the chimney. We are in the in-between spaces, the pause between heartbeats, the silence between words. We love you more than death, which is to say we love you still, which is to say we love you always, which is to say love doesn't need a living body to live in. Your sun and moon, that's how Papa says to sign it. Daniel and Robert. The words hung in the air for a moment, made of snow and starlight and the particular kind of cold that preserves things, then dissolved, each letter becoming a regular snowflake again, falling normally now, down instead of up, as if gravity had remembered its job. Eleanor stayed on her knees beside the grave until her legs went numb, reading and rereading the words that had already disappeared but were burned into her memory like brands, like blessings, like promises that didn't need to be kept because they were self-fulfilling. When she finally stood, she noticed something impossible. There were 3 sets of footprints in the snow, leading away from the grave. Hers coming up the hill, and 2 others, one large, one small, leading back toward the house. But they weren't pressed into the snow. They were absences of snow, places where the snow hadn't fallen, as if someone had walked there and the sky had respected their passage enough to snow around them, not on them. She followed the footprints down the hill, and they led exactly where she knew they would, to the kitchen door, up the steps, through the door that was still locked from the inside, to the kitchen table where 3 cups of coffee sat steaming, though she had only made 1. She sat down in her chair, looked at the 2 empty chairs that weren't empty, not really, not anymore, and lifted her cup. "Merry Christmas," she said to the kitchen that was full of absence, that was actually presence. The house settled around her with a sound like contentment, and she could swear she heard, no, she did hear, Robert's laugh, quiet and rare and precious, and Daniel's voice saying, "Papa, she can see us." From that night forward, Eleanor was never alone. She couldn't always see them, couldn't always hear them, but she could feel them. Robert's presence when she worked in the garden, hands that weren't quite there guiding hers to the best seeds. Daniel's laughter when she taught at the school, showing her which children needed extra attention, which ones were carrying griefs too big for their small bodies. And every snowfall brought new letters, some long, some short, some just drawings Daniel made of his new existence, which looked remarkably like the old one, except everyone had wings that were also roots, that were also rivers. The town noticed the change in Eleanor. She smiled now, really smiled, not the practiced expression she had worn like a mask for 7 years. She spoke to the air and waited for responses only she could hear. She planted corn 2 weeks early that spring, despite everyone saying it was too soon, and had the best harvest in the county when the brutal summer heat killed everyone else's late-planted crops. She started teaching children to read the snow, though most of them thought it was just a game, making up stories about what the patterns meant. But a few of them, the ones who had lost people too soon, understood that she was teaching them a real language. The grammar of grief transformed into joy. One child, Lucy Morrison, whose mother had died in childbirth, became particularly adept at reading the snow. She would stand in the schoolyard with her arms spread wide, catching flakes on her tongue, and then report messages. "My mama says the baby shoes are too small already," or she wants Daddy to know the money is hidden in the flour tin. Small, practical communications that proved themselves true enough that even skeptics started paying attention to the weather differently. That spring, something extraordinary happened. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. At 44, after 7 miscarriages and 7 years alone, her body decided to accept one more soul. The doctor was baffled, concerned, warned her about the dangers of late pregnancy, but Eleanor just smiled and said, "The baby's been practicing being ready. She knows what she's doing now." The pregnancy was easy, easier than any of the others had been, as if this child had learned from all the failed attempts what not to do, how to hold on, how to grow properly. Eleanor could feel Daniel and Robert around her constantly during those months, their invisible hands on her belly, their whispered encouragements when she was tired, their excitement that was almost tangible, like electricity before a storm. On December 19, 1928, exactly 1 year after the first upward-falling snow, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter. The labor was quick, almost eager, as if the baby couldn't wait any longer to join the world. She was born with her eyes wide open, looking around the room, as if searching for faces she recognized. And when Eleanor held her for the first time, the baby reached out her tiny hand towards something no one else could see and grabbed it, holding tight to an invisible finger. Eleanor named her Hope, partly for what she represented, but mostly because that's what Daniel had suggested in a snow letter 2 weeks before the birth. "She's made of hope," he had written. All the hopes of all the babies who didn't make it before, all combined into one very hopeful baby. Also, Papa says to tell you she's going to be stubborn. He's been watching her practice being born, and she insists on doing everything her own way. Hope grew up surrounded by the seen and the unseen, treating both as equally real, which they were. She would have tea parties with empty chairs that weren't empty, play catch with someone only she could see, learn to read from books that Daniel held open in spaces between air. The town thought Eleanor was raising a fanciful child, prone to imagination. But then Hope would know things she couldn't know, when storms were coming days before the weather changed, where lost things were hiding, what people needed before they asked. When Hope was 5, old enough to understand keeping secrets, Eleanor taught her to read the snow properly. They would stand in the yard during storms, faces turned up to the sky, reading the letters that fell and rose and fell again. Robert wrote about farming, about the secret lives of plants, about how love was just another form of photosynthesis, turning light into life. Daniel wrote about his continued education in the library of unfinished thoughts, about the friends he had made among the other children who had died too soon, about the games they played that involved colors that didn't exist in the living world but should. "Why can't everyone see them?" Hope asked once, building a snowman with 4 arms because Daniel had suggested it would be funnier that way. "Everyone could," Eleanor said, "if they believed that death was just a change in the weather, not the end of the world. But most people are afraid of weather they can't predict, so they close their windows and stay inside and miss all the best storms." As Hope grew older, she developed her own correspondence with the other side. She would leave letters in the snow for Daniel and Robert, and they would answer in frost on the windows, in the arrangement of fallen leaves, in the songs the wind sang through the chimney. It was, Eleanor realized, the family she had always imagined, just arranged differently than she had expected, some members solid, some translucent, but all present, all connected by bonds that death had stretched but not broken. The years passed with a strange quality of being both long and short simultaneously. Hope grew into a young woman who could speak to the living and the dead with equal ease, who helped grieving families read messages in precipitation, who knew that love was the only force in the universe that actually violated the laws of thermodynamics because it grew stronger with distance, more powerful with absence, eternal despite entropy. Eleanor aged gracefully, surrounded by the constant presence of her beloved dead and her miraculous living daughter. The farm prospered in ways that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with abundance. The abundance of love that flowed between worlds. The abundance of messages written in snow and rain and morning dew. The abundance of proof that nothing really ends, it just changes state. On her 70th birthday, December 19th, 1954, 27 years after the first upward snow, Eleanor woke to find every surface in the house covered with letters. Not snow letters, but paper letters, hundreds of them written in Daniel's evolving handwriting, showing his growth from 7 to what would have been 34. They told the story of his continued existence, his education in the mechanics of eternity, his work helping other children cross over, his pride in hope, his constant, unwavering love for his mother. The last letter placed on her pillow was in Robert's handwriting. "My dearest Eleanor, the house is ready. I've built it exactly like you remember, except the kitchen is bigger because Daniel insisted we needed more room for all the family meals we're going to have. The garden is planted with everything you love, plus some things that only grow here. Flowers that smell like laughter, vegetables that taste like comfort, fruit trees that bear memories instead of apples. Daniel is so eager to show you his library. He's been collecting all the stories you never got to tell him, all the lullabies you would have sung if there had been more time. He's saved them all for you to share properly. The door is opening soon. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Hope is strong enough now to read the snow on her own, to be the bridge between worlds that this place needs. Your work there is almost done, and your work here is ready to begin. We wait with patient impatience, with eager peace, with the kind of love that has been purified by separation into something stronger than steel, softer than snow, eternal as winter stars. Until soon, my love, until very soon, your devoted husband, Robert." Eleanor folded the letter carefully, placed it in the box where she kept all the impossible things that had happened since the snow started falling upward, and went to make breakfast for Hope, who was home for Christmas. They stood together in the kitchen, the young woman and the old, the living and the soon-to-be transformed, reading the morning snow that fell gently, normally, but carrying messages for those who knew how to see them. "Will you teach others?" Eleanor asked Hope. "After I go?" Hope nodded. Her eyes, Daniel's eyes, Eleanor's eyes, the eyes of all the children who had tried to be born, bright with understanding. "I'll teach anyone who has lost someone that loss is just love, with nowhere to go until you learn to read the snow. I'll teach them that death is just a very long pause in a conversation that always resumes. I'll teach them what you taught me, that love violates all the laws of physics because it was here before physics, will be here after physics, is the thing that physics is trying unsuccessfully to explain." Eleanor smiled and squeezed her daughter's hand, feeling the warmth of the living and the presence of the dead, and the thin, permeable boundary between them that snow knew how to cross, had always known how to cross, would always know how to cross for those who believed in impossible mail systems and letters that fell upward, and love that used frozen water as its alphabet. 3 days later, on Christmas Eve, Eleanor died peacefully in her sleep, crossing over as easily as walking from one room to another in a house she knew well. Hope found her in the morning, smiling, holding a letter that hadn't been there the night before. It was in Eleanor's handwriting, though written after she died, a final message from the other side of the snow. Hope, my darling, I made it. The house is perfect. Your father and brother are exactly as I remembered, but also more real, more themselves, more alive than living allows. The snow here doesn't just carry messages. It is message, is meaning, is the medium through which love travels between all worlds. Watch for my letters in the rising steam, in the morning frost, in the snow that falls upward when the weight of love reverses gravity. I'll write to you every day, as Daniel wrote to me, as all the dead write to all the living if only they knew how to read precipitation. Teach them hope. Teach them that death is weather, not ending. Teach them that snow has memory and shares it generously with those who know how to ask. Teach them that every snowflake is a word in a love letter from someone they miss, saying the only thing that matters, the only thing that's true. We are still here. We are always here. We love you through the snow, in the snow, as the snow. Forever and always, Mom. Hope continued the work, teaching a world wrapped in winter how to read the messages that fell from heaven, rose from earth, traveled sideways through the spaces between. She had children of her own, who had the gift stronger than she did, who could not only read the snow, but write back in rain, in mist, in the breath that fogs windows on cold mornings. The Hartley farm became a place of pilgrimage for the grieving, who came to learn the language of loss transformed into connection. They would stand in the fields where Eleanor had first seen the upward snow, faces raised to the sky, learning that death was just weather, sometimes harsh, sometimes gentle, always temporary, always leading back to clear skies where love was the only constant, the only force that could make snow fall up, souls fall back to earth, and hearts fall open to the impossible possibility that nothing ever really ends. And in every snowflake that fell or rose or drifted sideways through the Vermont winters, Eleanor and Robert and Daniel wrote their endless letters, their eternal correspondence, their proof written in frozen water that love is the only mail that always gets delivered, even when the address is heaven and the postage is paid in tears that freeze before they fall, becoming diamonds, becoming stars, becoming snow that remembers everything and everyone and shares those memories with anyone brave enough to stand in a storm and read. The snow still falls upward sometimes in Vermont when the love is strong enough and the need is great enough and the hearts are open enough to receive messages from the meteorological mail system of the universe. And for those who know how to read it, every storm is a letter saying, death is just distance, and distance is nothing to love.